And we are online.
Okay, so it seems I got promoted to running this.
You think that's a promotion?
I don't know. I'll assume. I'll say so. We want to discuss a few things. The first one is the issue around the addition of compute or a compute-like API on the native API of Ehcache. So GSR 107 has an entry processor concept, and so we were wondering about adding something in the same vein on the Ehcache API, and Ludovic did some work on that. There is a pull request out, and we had discussion with Chris and Ludovic, at least that I know of, about whether or not we should do it. So I guess, Ludovic, you could start by explaining what you proposed, and then we can discuss what we want to do with it.
Right. So my understanding of the task was to create some kind of compute contract for the cache interface in the Ehcache API. And the second goal was, if possible, it would be nice to have if using that computing API, we could also implement the 107. Please remind me how that API is called. No one remembers.
Entry professor.
Say that again?
Entry professors, right? Invoke.
Yes, thank you. The entry processor. Okay, so I had a look at the computing contract, and my conclusion was the most natural thing would be to do what we did in the stores, which is basically having some kind of a copy of the compute if absent, compute if present contract of the concurrent hash map V8. That's rather natural. That's quite nice to use. People are generally used to work with that contract. Well, if they're well versed in that kind of compute contract. The problem is, well, so I came up with such API, and I implemented that. But for the second goal, trying to shoehorn the 107 API into that, it would have required to bastardize it quite inelegantly. So my conclusion is, yes, we can provide an elegant computation contract, but not fit the 107.1 in it.
And so based on that, we had conversation with, I think Chris was the first one doing some pushback about should we add such a feature on a cache. And while I was, I don't know how to say that, not sure about the reason Chris had, I realized that one thing we're doing with having a different contract is we're betting on a different horse. And we've got no idea if one or the other or none are actually going to be successful. And so I was wondering about not having that as part of the public API for the moment and wait till we get better feedback on 107 API usage, on Ehcache users requesting the feature and explaining what are the use cases, etc., etc. And one of the reasons we wanted to have the conversation today is that Alex is back and is the one who created the issue. But I believe he still has audio problems. So.
And we have the opportunity to have the discussion in a public forum and have it recorded so that if we decide to put it off and subsequently decide, oh, maybe we should do it again, we can all go back and rewatch our discussion and figure out if we want to do that or not and have everything noted down. Is Alex's audio working?
Is it working?
It is working. One thing I did want to show, because we were talking about this, and one thing that my objection to it is grounded in is actually in my deeper objection to methods like this that I don't feel belong on a cache. And so I was thinking to myself, well, this feels like deja vu. I'm sure I've talked about this before. And so I found this, which goes back to the. Oh, I should probably do the present to everyone, shouldn't I? I don't know how to do that. I think Alex might be able to do
Maybe
it
Alex can do it.
because then it's guaranteed to show up on the video.
Yep.
So this dates back to, as it says, May 8th of 2013. It dates back to that horrible time when we were having to comment on the JSR 107 spec being standardized through Greg because it was politically difficult for us to comment directly, particularly if we had opinions or thoughts that disagreed with Greg's position on things. And I still fundamentally agree with this, and I mean this conversation goes on for quite a while, and I don't know if we want to go through it all now, but I still feel like this is where I stand on things. And I actually think, I mean, there's two things that are expressed in here. I think this is my writing. It seems very me, at least the text. That there's two things being discussed in here. One is my argument that the whole thing's completely nonsense and we shouldn't put it in the cache. But the second is, if you want to have something like this in the cache, please have something like update and get, which is what's in JDK 8 for this kind of thing on an atomic reference, because it makes much clearer the nullipotent contract that's placed on the lambda that you pass in, because at the moment that's not clear at all, particularly for anyone, particularly because it's not using a lambda interface name that will be familiar to anyone who's using this in a JDK 8 land, and so it's very easy for someone to accidentally do something that's going to completely break things, and potentially completely break them in ways that like deadlock stuff, or live lock, or who the hell knows what else. You can imagine someone. The fun thing would be a cas loop where someone writes a lambda expression that in turn modifies the thing it's trying to cas on, because it'll just spin forever. Because it'll always invalidate its own.
But what is the what's the canonical use case for this thing? Really?
No. So do you want to see Brian Oliver's response to my question?
No, wait, because I think I see where this comes for them, but wouldn't something like this? Well, what is it? What was it called again? Not the self-populating cache, but wouldn't it be something useful to have on the cache so that only a single thread does the actual population of the cache in the case of a miss, and that you don't end up racely populating the cache, but you already can do this through
with
cache
a cache loader. Yeah, you just have a cache loader that puts everything in a queue and has a thread work against the queue.
Right. So
this is the thing. It feels like something that belongs on a general purpose data structure or a general purpose data storage thing, and that's not what a cache is. Right. Brian makes this great comment. I'll page down because I'm going to. So Brian makes a great comment. On here. Take an example of appending a single item to an array list with large entries in it. I've seen this use case as a product example. In Terracotta, you need to bring the. But the problem is, this is done in Terracotta in Ehcache because you're misusing the cache as a store. He further on goes. What is it? The spec leads fundamental. So I've made the statement: caches are designed to cache an authoritative data source. In that sense, it seems bizarre to have any mutative methods that aren't focused on keeping the cache in sync with its authority. And then he says the spec leads fundamentally disagree with this. Caches, by definition, are a copy of data for the purposes of reducing latency, keeping it closer, blah blah, and/or for improving application throughput of processing. There's no requirement for any cache to be bound to an authoritative data source. But he used in his own definition, caches by definition are a copy of data. Well, where did the copy come from? You can't copy something unless you've got an authority to source the data from. They, by definition, are always bound to an authoritative data source. That authoritative data source may not be a single process. He gives an example of an internet browser cache is not designed or mandated to stay in sync. Yeah, it is. Of course, browser caches are designed to stay in sync. That's why they have expiry.
Well, to eventually be in sync.
They have an authority. The authority is the internet. Yes, they might be lazy, but you can do that with TTIs and TTLs. That's what that's for. The authority is the internet. Now, the authority obviously is disparate in that sense, but it's still there. Anyway, I'm getting off. Well, I'm not getting off topic in my head. This is the very crux of it all. But
Okay, that just got tweeted, right? The authority is the internet, and I could not possibly miss that. What? Okay, so I guess.
Anyway, if you want to, if we people want to, if we want to abandon this route, whatever, we can. But this is fundamentally what this is kind of argument is what backs my argument that compute doesn't belong.
I just necessarily don't know, because if you, actually I'm sort of, all right, let me play a little bit of devil's advocate here, and I'm going to use the exact use case that he uses, which is append something to a list.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you could totally have something that is representative of a sort of an event log, right, where you aggregate stuff together under a given key. What kind of, well, whatever, actually. Able to add and now, and that just pull that iPhone.
Is Alex breaking up just for me?
He froze for a moment.
Yeah, you froze for a minute, and now you're a little choppy.
That's horrible. I don't know what to do.
So you're about. You could try turning your video off, maybe, in case it's your upstream that's having problems.
Yeah, I don't know what the problem is. I'll try to figure this out afterwards. Anyways, so can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So to take the example of an event log, right, where you aggregate stuff in a given key, so an event comes around and you need to append something to that log. Let's say it's an array and a list of things, and you need to add one thing at the end of the list. So now you have two options, right? Other things is already in the cache, and then all you need to do is, because this thing came around, you consider this thing hot, so you want it to be updated in the cache. You can already build on the elements already in the list and simply add the thing to the list and just make sure that the events are streamed properly so that you never lose an added element to the end of the list. Or in case it's not there in the cache, you go to your system of record and you pull the entire thing out, you add the one in, and you repopulate your entire log into the cache. That particular example seems to make for a legit caching use case that I don't see how you would implement any other way than.
But isn't that kind of like?
Actually, you can't implement this with the replace, right?
You can do it.
You can do it.
Yeah, you can do it. You can do anything with the get and replace. The only time that list appending thing gives any value is if your cache actually understands what the lambda is doing and understands how the value is structured and knows it can ship the operation.
Well, no, I guess that's I don't. Now you're trying to optimize something that I wasn't into even trying.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. That's the only advantage you get from this invoke thing.
That's not true. Think your cache is on heap, like everything's there. You don't care. You don't need. There are already 200 elements in that list, right? One comes in, you have it. It's on heap. You just append it to the end. We're in the pure on heap use case here. In the other case, right, where you invalidate everything, you end up with a, let's say, JDBC, because Brian being an Oracle guy, we go to Oracle database in the back, we add the thing in, we retrieve everything back in, and we mutate the cache. We put the new entry in the cache. Well, you could do this with writers. Well, not with writers. It's way more I/O than you'd get by simply adding. Yeah, I know where this is coming from. The other argument being about distributed cache topologies and so forth. And then the point you're making is neither true or true or false. It's just that what you're saying applies in our topology doesn't apply in his, right?
But here's the thing. To me, this is what we're seeing here is this problem that you have this concept of this is. So I was talking to Louis about potential of bringing up this in the bar for Java 1. To me, one of the problem this is a symptom of a problem that when we say caching and cache, all the time we talk about the verb first. When Brian talked about what a cache is, he used cache in the verb sense. A cache is something that basically holds the data close. right? And acts like a high performance, low latency latency proxy for the authoritative data source. Although he didn't use authoritative, he said copy, whatever the hell. It's still an authority. There's somewhere you got the data from. If it's not that, maybe it's an operational store. Anyway, point being, there are a million different ways, possibly an infinite universe of possible kinds of data storage thing you can define and different kinds of data models. And so if cache is a verb, you can combine that verb with any data model and get a new cache implementation who exposes its data for CRUD operations through a set of operations that are a good proxy for the data model that you're caching. The problem is that 107 is trying to be a general purpose cache that can cache a SQL database, that can cache a key value database, that can cache a graph database, that can cache an XML database, that can cache the internet, that can cache anything, right? And so it feels to me like this invoke method is trying to be the general purpose route into be able to express any possible data manipulation pattern that you could have on your authority. But to me, isn't that better solved by not using the same data modeling in your cache as you do in your authority, which is exactly, for example, the way that Hibernate solve it with their second level cache. They say, well, we can't cache the SQL row. That's insane. We're not a SQL cache. You can't execute SQL against us. But what we'll do is we'll do a data modeling exercise purely for the cache and form the cache in a way that it can sit in this halfway house and make sure that, because most general purpose caches are key value based, we won't rely on value introspection. We'll break everything down by key. So to my mind, this cache invoke is trying to be a silver bullet, and all it turns itself into is a nightmare for implementers and something that is very hard for a user to use because they've no idea what kind of performance they're going to get. And the performance will be a massive function of what kind of cache they're using it on. That was a very long, ranty, waffly thing I said. Did any of it make any sense? Or is Alex's audio broken? Or is my audio broken?
We can hear you fine, Chris.
Cool.
Yeah, you broke up for me, then.
Oh, shit.
I think I get your point, and I get your point, and I certainly am fine, like, deferring on this, right? And say let's not do anything for now, because of our views being so different.
This is one of the things I'd like to defer it until after the BOF, because I think it'll be very interesting to see what direction JCache 2 decides to go in, because my strong opinion is that JCache 2 should be focused on closing the existing holes in the one spec around 107 being for a key value cache. But it seems like a lot of the other people in the community are interested in pushing it in the direction of a cache being an operational store, which I think is a very different thing. Either that, or maybe a cache being a cache over a specific kind of authority, which, if I were being a cynic, I would suggest was maybe an authority that a vendor might sell.
That was cynic.
That was cynical. I think key value, but the thing is, I think fundamentally key value is a good lowest common denominator. I think a lot of complicated data models, graph databases, XML databases, SQL databases, you can do a very simple data modeling exercise to get to the point where you confront them with a key value cache with a small amount of glue code. It's a good, like, base point at which to aim for. And I think 107 could benefit a huge amount from trying to be a good API for a key value cache, rather than trying to be a panacea.
Okay.
For example, the list thing. I would have said if you find yourself continually doing list operations on things in the cache, maybe your cache should be structured such that you don't actually store lists as values. You store the list elements as values.
How do you get to the entire list?
Well, the question is, do you?
Well, that's what I need to. That's my initial use case. I need to have the event log for something.
Then maybe the answer is that you can traverse it. I don't know. The problem is
This leads into other crappy things that came up back in the past, right? Like what was it again? How do we call that stuff? Like those groups of entries that if one expired, then all need to expire. Yeah, it's. I think this is more of a crazy idea.
I mean, dipping into 107, I think it's nuts that we talk about extending 107 until we fix things like being able to specify capacity eviction through the spec.
Right. Okay, but that's different.
This is a different story. Anyway, but yeah, I don't know, but I fear, and the other thing, of course, is that even like I said, the other point of this initial issue was even if you think that a general purpose compute method belongs on a cache, I don't think the one we've got is very good. Because I think that it's awkward to use and it's easy to break. So that's the other danger, of course, is that if we say, oh, well, that one's wrong, let's go for something different, and then subsequently in Ehcache 2 we decide that it's wrong and we want to use something different again, you then have this problem because you want to make sure that you end up, ideally you want to end up with something close and maybe the same.
All right, so is the agreement that we postpone this issue for the next milestone then, and don't do anything now?
Yeah.
Well, there is a solution, right? Even though maybe it requires some documentation to show how people ought to do the proper get replace thing that deals with eviction and all of that, but we could, right? It's
yes. I don't think, and I don't think that there's anything right now. I don't think that's going to be significantly worse in performance than a compute, and it would take quite a large amount of engineering effort on our part to make compute dramatically quicker, particularly for particularly for clustered use cases.
Oh, yeah, but okay. Then, do we want to get there? Okay, let me get there. We can. There are actually some use cases that you can sort of trivially address, even in our world, right? So if I take the example from the coherence doc that even mentions Stengasol, I think I saw further down there, that talks about incrementing an int, right?
Yep.
Maybe not the exact one that's there because they do object graph navigation language kind of thingy, but on a number valued cache.
So suppose it's key to value. You could increment it in place in off heap. How do you know it's incrementing? How do you know that's what that thing does?
Well, yeah, you just
you have to have a DSL for describing functional operations on values.
Scroll down on your screen. The answer is right under.
Yes, they have a number incrementer, but that means blowing our stuff open and then supporting this. It's a massive amount of extra work, particularly because it's typeset. Well, we can close it artificially if we want.
Well, they have.
Well, that's what they've done.
Right? Yeah.
Well, kind of closed it.
Anyways, But I agree, and it will all depend on what the future brings, I guess. So, yeah, let's punt on this for now.
It's going to be a fun boff. I will stop. Where's my mouse? Oh, that's Louis' mouse, or somebody else's mouse moving. No, who else's mouse? Oh, it was my mouse moving. Oh, that's weird. Move your mouse, and then you see your mouse moving, and it's because I don't want to present to everyone.
You should stop sharing, Chris.
I'm trying.
No, you can't.
Oh,
Alex has to do it.
Alex has to stop me. I know. I stopped sharing. I was still presenting. I stopped sharing, but everyone was forced to look at my ugly mug.
I'll try and give video another try with lower quality.
Okay, so we agree to disagree that we're not in agreement for the moment, and so we postpone. But we don't even agree to where we postpone.
I think we all.
At least for milestone 2, for sure.
We all agree there is a certain amount of uncertainty about compute. We may disagree about how much uncertainty, but I think we all agree that there's probably enough uncertainty to warrant delaying. and that we don't think implementing it is particularly tricky given how lots of the internals currently work, which is what Ludovic found when he went to implement it.
Yep. Okay.
Whereas apparently implementing invoke entry press invoke is quite tricky.
Well, I guess invoke, the main problem comes with the weird contract it has over the return.
Yeah.
Mostly, it's the side effects that are the killers. But you have to set the statistics in a certain way and stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
Good news is they're not going to be testable for much longer.
Different topic. Okay, cool. So, Ludovic, you'll close your pull request and put back the issue in the backlog as blocked.
And postpone it, make it milestone 3, so that we reevaluate it when we get there, but that doesn't appear in the milestone 2 backlog. Ooh, major artwork. Look at that. Impressive.
I hate you. The next point we wanted to discuss was issue 165.
Which is? Only majors know what issue refer to what just by the number.
No, it's because I have the board open in front of my eyes.
It's
also,
the thing we talked about this morning.
Yeah, fighting events.
Yeah.
Event firing.
Yeah. Okay. I still believe I'm right.
I think the kind of solution you're proposing is the right kind of solution. I don't know if your particular solution is the right one, but I also think that that's not something we want to do in 2. Milestone 2. But certainly not now. I think it's the kind of piece of work that needs to be done right at the beginning of a milestone, so that there is time for bake and bug fixing, etc.
And so, can you remind us what you were proposing, Alex? Because I think that happened in another discussion.
Yes. So my take is we shouldn't. What we should do is, I think this. Well, this is what the first part of what I'm going to say is probably where Chris is not necessarily in agreement or not sure whether it's the best solution or not. But I would go for a model that sort of is a two-phase commit. It's
Sorry,
okay.
You broke up.
Okay, then I cannot do this. Sorry. Chris knows my answer. Let Chris explain what I'm thinking.
Oh. Basically, what Alex wants to do is think about it this way.
Be able to enqueue the events.
Well,
firing control.
I'm actually gonna phrase it even more of an abstract way, because queuing maybe is too strict for certain, depending. Basically, he wants to decouple the creation of the event
and its firing.
And the firing. And so then what you can do is you can create the event in the Lambda, which then is scoped within the Ehcache code and can be done once. And the only thing that belongs in the stores is basically you need to stick a weave point, like a join point, effectively almost like you could do, God, you could almost do it with like aspect more in the program. You basically need to inject a point that says, this is the point at which I have committed, this thing has happened. And this is the point at which I still hold exclusion. So you can block me here. This is one where you can do your synchronous bar. Well, I guess you could do that outside technically because you can't. Anyway, basically you provide a point at which you say thing happened, but you decouple that from what the thing was, and then outside of all of this, those messages go to a central box whose job it is to fire events. And there's one of those, and it basically then decides based on the policy that an event is supposed to be fired with on a given listener, when it's safe for it to fire it, and what kind of policy and how the queuing works and stuff. And that might mean there are queues, and it might mean they're not, and blah, blah, blah. But all of that logic goes in there. It's not duplicated. And the only thing that gets duplicated is the only thing that gets duplicated is the information about when things are supposed to be fired. So the store has to say, I've stored X. X has happened. Is that fair, Alex?
Yes, as Chris
Yeah.
said. This guy's bright.
And that's the extent to which I agree with him. Basically, we can disagree about exactly how that box works, but you know what's great? It's a box.
It's a box, so we can implement it and improve it.
We can implement the interface and screw about with it till the cows come home. And no one cares.
That is the thing that is the dearest to me in that solution, is that it's a single responsibility of this box to deal with all of that, and it's not scattered all over the place. And I kind of like that.
And this was what I was. I think this is about as good as we're going to get. I think in terms of not complicating the stores, and it should be pretty clean. But I still think it's not something we want to do now. For A, because we don't want to delay milestone 2 anymore, and B, because I think it's something that needs to be done at the beginning of a milestone, so you have time for a debate before you show it to the world. Cool.
Yes, and it has dependency on, well, depending on how you do this, but you could make things more or less smart with having further threads doing certain things for you and so forth. And if you want to go that route, then you want to have to be ready along with that, because otherwise we're slowly going down the path of thread explosions, where we want to enable the users to have a control over how crazy we go with threads. Yeah.
What? No, it's not really. This is not really the topic for this discussion, because it's a how do you use Git question, and I won't ask it. Never mind.
Okay, so does that mean we also agree that 350 and so issues about the fixed service for threading, we move these to maybe not.
Well, actually, we could rename it to say exactly what we just said. Right?
165 could certainly be fleshed out, yeah.
So that it's not only about solving that problem. It's like make like decoupling events. Well, somebody words that.
Decoupling event creation from event firing.
Yeah, because I think back when I did, you probably would end up with something like fire synchronous, and you will need to let, sorry, fire ordered and fire unordered?
Yep.
Maybe, yeah, I guess. Yeah,
Sync async is easier to resolve. It's really the ordered versus unordered that's...
Right, but you will need to let the thing know, right? So, yeah, I don't know. Well, anyways, I don't want to think about this now, but yeah.
So what I'm writing on the issue is from dev meeting on July 30th. We discussed that the end result.
And update the title of the issue too, then, right? Make it so like I don't know.
System should be. Okay, cool. I'm doing that.
It's effectively a big refactoring of the event firing mechanisms.
I mean, in principle, I don't think it's an enormous amount of work, actually.
No, I don't think so either. That depends how far you want to push it.
Yeah, it depends how far you want to push your box, yes.
Yeah, because you could do very smart boxes. But the good news is we don't need those, I think. We need minimal... Not to begin with. We'll need to hire smart developers. But once we have these, this can come like further down the path, right? I think for now, what we need is something to support what we promise in terms of the API, i.e. the matrix of the 2x2 there. And move from there, right? And then we can, in like further, I guess, minor releases, we can come up with better things.
Yep. I don't know if you stopped abruptly or if you broke up there, but whatever.
I stopped abruptly. I realized I pressed the mute button pretty quickly.
Cool. Since we're here and we've got 15 minutes, Is there anything else to discuss? Did you want to show the stuff you did to the service framework?
Yeah, let's do that. Then it can act as a introduction to review the pull request.
Oh, that's optimistic.
Yeah. How should I show that? I know. I'm gonna share.
You do have exactly 15 minutes though, because I have to go to a meeting yet.
Yeah, no problem. Let's do that. But I'm gonna show like commit per commit. I'm gonna skip the first one, which is about making discover service private and a few issues that we have. So here, what I'm doing is a number of things that related to fixing the way we initialize services. I dropped the configuration, so the service config, from service.start. So service.start only takes a reference to a service provider. I replaced that by passing the configuration through servicefactory.create. It was there, but that becomes the only way to pass using the service factory a configuration when you want to create a service inside the cache manager. I'm going to use that as the example. I also dropped the service locator param from service factory create, so that the idea would be you get the config when you construct the service, you get the provider in case you need dependency on other services when the service gets started. And so it splits these two responsibilities that way. And then, of course, it requires some changes in the service locator around the discovering and the starting of core services.
But so that means that I can't, during the create, I need to potentially be way more lazy in terms of what I look up and things and how I wire the actual object graph together now. Then.
Yes.
Right.
Correct?
If you need to do stuff, if your configuration process depends on looking at other services, you'll have to wait and hold the configuration and do it on start.
Yes, but one of the problems we had was that the behavior was potentially different depending on the state of the service locator. So this block of code, the discover service, and I think that's the fix me right there. What would happen is that if the service locator is started, then you would discover the service potentially having no config here because it was not passed to you. And then you would start the service, and when you would do that, you would start it with a null configuration.
Mm-hmm.
If the service locator was not started, then you would potentially discover the service, not start it, and when you would be able to finally start all services by passing service configuration, there suddenly it would get its config. And so we had kind of two end states that were possible just because of the order of things happening, and it seemed wrong. And I've played with the different version, saying, okay, create takes no parameters, so you can't pass a config, you just create a service. And the service factory system forces you to have an empty constructor for your service. But if you do that, then I ended up having problems because then you would have to start services in the context of a user-managed cache. You would have to, for a strange reason, start the service outside of passing it inside the user-managed cache. And so that seemed really weird.
Why is this weird? This makes total sense.
No, because it would have happened.
Okay, I will just say I agree, but I already can tell you I will hold my right to bitch at every single decision you've made in the very near-term future.
So here, you would end up having to do something like, oh, that should not be in the pull request. Crap, my bad.
It's because no one's reviewed it yet.
Yeah, but I need to remove that's a line.
Whatever.
Leftover. So saying that you can't take a configuration at construction time force this path to be taken. Like you had to create the service with no configuration and start it outside, although the persistence user managed cache still uses a service provider that at least gives you access to the default services that we do load through the service factory. And so it felt really weird, and the other way doesn't, and ends up working cleanly. So first of all, why does it end up working cleanly? Because, for example, the class instance provider then becomes much,
Command F.
And I'm not in an IDE, so I shouldn't just tap the capital letters. So here we had all kind of weird thing where we would check, oh, you can't provide this the cache level configuration at the cache manager level, which could have been weird in the context of a user managed cache if you manage to trigger these errors. And here the change is that instead of taking the class of the top level config, you just get the top level config directly through the constructor. And it's true that then the factory gains some responsibility. So if I go to cache loader, writer, provider.
Right. Oh, he wants the config. Wow.
There, the factory. Then, for example, here indeed the factory says, okay, if the config you're passing me at start time is a cache level configuration, I can do the check here, and it's that still exists.
So yeah, I'm like, you didn't solve anything as far as I can read this, but okay. I don't see how this is any better.
The one thing that I believe is solved is there is no longer two different states when you discover a service. If you discover a service with a configuration, it will have this configuration, and then you can start it. If it doesn't have a configuration, then if the service accepts to be discovered without configuration, that's what you get. And the start is no longer the deciding factor. Because we had that code, and I think that was one of the link to the fix me. And also, I believe it was weird in any way to allow the factory create to take the service, the discover of the service, because if you do that, then potentially what you get is a non-started service locator that you use to look up services. And that seemed wrong.
I mean, so there's two things about this that I like. One is it definitely seems wrong that you can pass the config in two different places. It doesn't. I don't understand what purpose that is serving, and quite what an implementation is supposed to do with that is not at all clear. Are they supposed to match? Are they supposed to not match? Is it allowed to take half of its config in one place and half in another? And how is it supposed to merge?
That I totally agree with. But I think we went for the wrong place.
You went for the wrong split. Okay, that's fine. The other thing that I really like about this is the changes that ended up happening. Because the thing that initially prompted all of this was a problem in the disk store stuff, whereby if you didn't provide a
yeah, but that's a secondary fix. If you remember,
no, I'm still confused. I'm reading the code. Did you not? Because now I realize I actually agree with this code. What the
which
fuck?
code?
Am I drunk or what's going on? At the beginning, didn't your thing say that you pass the config to the start and not to the create anymore? Because otherwise my argument didn't make sense when I made my argument. When I said you need to drop the config as part of the start. Okay, I'm an idiot. So it's you don't need to be lazy at all. To create for core services, drop the blah blah blah.
So you get config on creation, and then you get the service provider on start.
And
all right, yeah, no, I meant for the lookup. Yeah, that's the thing that bothers me.
And when you provide it, it links also to the way you would provide a service to the cache manager. Let's say you want to override one of the default services.
Yeah, maybe you're right.
Currently, the proper way of doing it would be to provide a service not configured in the builder and then provide the configuration next to it. What's the point? Let's just say that we expect you to provide a constructed services that takes its basic configuration and then you just give us the service. And then any configuration you give us is a different level if it applies to this specific service.
Right. Oh yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe it all makes sense. So what's the other thing you like, Chris?
The other thing I like is a subsequent change, which is what started this investigation, really.
Yes. And so then you've got subsequent change, which is that one. And so here the idea is to say, I'm replacing service provider that finds service by service provider that gets service and service provider that get or create service. To make it very explicit as a consumer, whether you expect the service to be there, and if it's not there, you want it at all costs. That's the get or create. I mean, do your best to provide it to me. And the other one is get it, and if it's not there, then it means something is wrong.
So this showed up in the disk store stuff, whereby if you didn't configure the persistence provider at the cache manager level, but then requested that a cache be persistent or be disky, then what would happen is you'd call find service with find service local persistence service, and you get a null pointer exception. Because what it would do is it go, oh, well, the service doesn't exist. Oh, but I see that there's a provider. Okay, let's call provider with the config that we don't have. Okay, no, never mind, we'll just give it null. And then the provider throws null pointer exception at you.
And it seemed wrong.
Which is wrong, because what's actually going on is when the disk store, the contract of the disk store is it has an expectation that the service exists, and if it doesn't, that's a problem in and of itself. You shouldn't try and create it. It's supposed to be here.
Yep.
And yet there are other places where, like get or create, where what you're saying is if you've configured, if there's a time service that already exists, fine, I'll take that one. But if not, try and create it, because there is such a thing as the default one doesn't take config. It will just create itself in there, time source.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is what started the investigation. Then Louis started yak shaving.
Yeah, I remember that. Well, I was part of some of that. Yeah.
And then I was in some meetings and then probably led him down the wrong road. It's all my fault if it's wrong.
And so that one, when you look indeed at the disk store, you see there is a difference between getting the time source service or the serialization provider, which are services that are always present. And part of the discussion happened around how to express this always present. And at one point I made a proposal where I had added...
I could argue that I don't really like the way that it's happening now then, because, sorry, I'm really being a pain in the butt. Because now you made that every other consuming service problem to decide whether it should be there or not. I know. And I don't think that's correct. So I think what we're missing is something that actually puts the thing in when stuff starts up in a cache manager, and make sure that what is part of the deal. Me as a cache manager, I promise that when I hand you over a service provider, you will always be able to find a time source service in it.
Yes.
For instance.
You're right. I'm not sure about the way we currently. I think get or create makes sense, but I'm not entirely convinced by the way we currently use it.
Yeah. Me neither, but it's not the end of the world. It's again, it's.
I know Louis is sketchy about this too, because we had this.
I did propose an alternative at one point, and for the annotation that said mandatory service.
But I don't think it's up to the service either. There's three entities here. There's the consumer, there's the provider, and there's the binding thing. It's the binding thing that defines what the mandatory services are. The cache manager in this case,
but I think that's a cache manager's role. He should be the one that makes this promise somehow.
Okay, but then
and he should be the one. Maybe he should be the one calling the get or create or register or lookup service on the class path or whatever.
On the things that he thinks
one
are
and only ones. That needs to be there. And if he can't find them, he throws at you and says, "Sorry, man, what you have here is a fucked up bundle."
But
because
so
I'm I should be able to find this, and I'm not.
Well, actually,
So-
what he should do is he should extend his service provider so that if somebody asks, because for example, he doesn't want to instantiate a service if it's never going to be used. So it's actually
Well,
more
but that-
about him modifying the behavior of get.
Well, that's not entirely true because we have this now anyways, right? So if it has config, it's going to be created, it's going to be
Okay.
started, even though it may never be used.
So honestly, I don't mind redoing that commit. But then should I do then something which is, and I think it's a combination of what you just said. The cache manager is going to have the service locator, so the specific object which has the multiple methods, including ones that allow him to create a service with an empty config if that's what he wants.
Mhm.
The service provider, which we give to other services, will just have a get.
Yeah.
No get or create, just a get. And then what we do is the cache manager creates a service provider decorator around the locator, which is what he hands over. And that one knows about all the mandatory services that a cache manager must provide. And so that includes time source service.
I have nothing. I think that's a good idea, but it's still a little bit at odds with the stuff that I just said with the config, right? As of today, if you provide a config to a service, that service is going to get created and started, regardless of the fact whether it's used or
Well,
not.
but now that you're introducing a fourth entity. There's four entities now. There's the consumer, there's the provider, there's the consumer of a service, there's the implementation of a service, there's the binder, and then there's the user. Because when the user gives you config for a service at the highest level, that's a mandate. That's this thing is. Here's some configuration information. Create this. That's explicit as opposed to an implicit.
That's work. That works. If the user gives you a config, we will start the service. No problem. Yeah. The problem here happens that, for example,
I understand. I understand the difference, Louis. It's just I wasn't sure whether the difference in behavior was, let's say, suitable. But I think it is. I'm fine. Yeah,
I think it's all right.
Do it. But make it happen.
And so it means that we've got an object, whether it's and do we find acceptable that if tomorrow, in the context of the threading service, which we decide is also something the cache manager offers always, and so if it has no configuration, it will need to start with a default thingy.
Yep.
Yeah, but it's a default.
That's the classic example of a service that is
but
mandatory, but you don't want to start it unless somebody asks for a thread. Right?
Well, I don't know. You could start the service, but the service doesn't need to start threads. It's just the service.
But the manager doesn't want. But then the manager's leaning. The manager wants to be minimalistic about that kind of thing. It's at that point the manager is leaning on the default implementation to do the right thing.
I think what we're discussing is that we want the service to be there, but then the fact that the service should be lazy in order to not eagerly allocate things if they're not needed, that's different.
Right, but I'm saying that the cache, but it's better for the cache manager to be lazy about creating the service than for the cache manager to rely on an external contract that the implementation of the service is itself lazy.
And it works. It's the one difference I see in this particular use case is exactly the same implementation as Chris proposed. Only maybe in this particular case, what you would have is sort of a default config that comes along with a type that this thing wants to apply to the threading service when it starts it because somebody is asking for stuff. So it works. Hey, we have a meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
We opened a fun can of worm, but looks like you have some.
Do we want to do it in the same PR, or do we want to?
No, I think we should keep this in the same PR. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, especially because
one awesome cleanup.
One of the commits makes no sense if we go for another solution.
Yeah.
And I still believe the rest of the PR makes sense because I still believe the cleanup makes sense. I'm just gonna go write up a few proposals and share them and discuss them.
Cool.
I'll close the PR once more.
Awesome. See you next week.